My stepfather inherited a lake house worth $450,000. He told my 10-year-old son he couldn't come to family weekends because you're not real family. I didn't fight it. For months later, during a family gathering there, a courier arrived with legal documents and said, "Delivery for the co-owner." My stepfather's hands started shaking. The courier was standing in the doorway of the lake house living room, holding a manila envelope with my name on it. Official seal. Legal weight. I was sitting on the worn leather couch by the window, the one that faced the dock. My son was outside skipping stones with his cousin, my half-sister's kid. The cousin who apparently counted as real family. My stepfather, Richard, was mid-sentence, explaining to my uncle about the property taxes and how he'd need to raise the weekend rental fee for family members who wanted to use the place. He'd been talking about it for 20 minutes. Making sure everyone understood this was his inheritance, his decision, his property. The courier said my name again. Delivery for Sarah Mitchell, co-owner. Let me tell you how we got here. My mother married Richard when I was 17. He had money, not generational wealth, but the kind that came from 40 years of careful investing and a successful career in commercial real estate development. My father had died when I was 9. Heart attack at 42. Left us with $87,000 in life insurance and a mortgage we couldn't afford. Mom worked 3 jobs for 5 years before she met Richard. I remember her falling asleep during my 8th grade choir concert. Front row, head back, mouth open. The other parents pretended not to notice. Richard was kind enough at first. Paid for my last year of high school at the private school Mom had somehow scraped together tuition for. Paid for my state university education, in-state tuition only. He was clear about that. When I graduated with my degree in finance, he told me at the celebration dinner that he hoped I'd make something of myself, unlike your father. My father had been a high school math teacher. I worked my first job out of college at a regional accounting firm, making $43,000 a year. Richard asked about my salary exactly once, nodded when I told him, and said, "Well, it's a start." By the time I was 25, I'd moved to a larger firm. $61,000. Richard's comment, "Still climbing, I see." I got married at 27 to a man Richard tolerated. Divorced at 29 when that man decided he preferred his coworker. Richard's comment, "I'm not surprised. You've always been difficult." My son was born 3 months after the divorce was final. His father signed away parental rights for $15,000 and the agreement that I'd never contact him again. I took both. Richard met my son exactly 4 times in the first 2 years of his life. Called him the boy exclusively. At Christmas 2019, when my son was 2, Richard handed my mother a savings bond for my half-sister's daughter. Nothing for my son. When I asked about it later, privately, Richard said, "I'm not obligated to provide for children who aren't blood-related to me." I reminded him he wasn't blood-related to me either. He said, "That's different. I married your mother. I took on certain responsibilities. But your choices are your own consequences." By 2020, I'd been promoted to senior financial analyst. $78,000. I'd also started consulting on the side, helping small business owners structure their LLC formations and manage their quarterly taxes. I charged $150 an hour and worked every evening after my son went to bed. I didn't tell my family about the consulting work. In March 2021, I registered my own LLC, Mitchell Financial Consulting. Filed it in Delaware for the privacy protections and the business-friendly tax structure. Total filing cost, $847. I used a registered agent service, so the business address wouldn't trace back to my apartment. My mother asked me that June why I looked so tired. I told her my son had been waking up at night. He slept through the night just fine. I'd been up until 2 a.m. most nights building my client base. Richard's father passed away in August 2021. The estate was substantial, 2 rental properties in Florida, a portfolio of municipal bonds worth roughly $340,000, and the lake house. Richard inherited everything. His only sibling, a sister, had died 15 years earlier. No other living relatives on his father's side. The lake house had been in the family since 1967. Richard's father had bought it for $31,000. The current estimated value, $450,000. Waterfront property, 2 acres, 4 bedrooms, completely renovated kitchen, new dock installed in 2019. Richard announced at the funeral reception that he intended to keep the lake house for family use. "This is our legacy," he said, standing in the funeral home with a glass of wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. "A place for our family to gather for generations." Our family. I noticed the pronoun choice. In October 2021, Richard sent out an email to the family, my mother, my half-sister Jessica, Jessica's husband, their 2 kids, my uncle Tom, and me. Subject line: Lake House Family Weekends. The email detailed a schedule. 1 weekend per month, rotating between families. Jessica's family would get first choice of summer weekends, since the children will enjoy it most during warm weather. I was allocated November, February, and 1 weekend in April. My son was 5. I replied to the email asking if we could switch April for a July weekend. My son had just started swim lessons. I thought he'd love the lake. Richard replied, CCing the entire family distribution list. The schedule has been set to be fair to everyone. Jessica's children have priority for summer months, as they're school-aged and more able to appreciate the experience. My son was also school-aged. Kindergarten. I didn't respond. The first family weekend Richard hosted was in January 2022. He invited everyone up for a winter gathering. My mother, Jessica's family, my uncle, 2 of Richard's business associates, and their wives. I arrived on Saturday morning with my son. We'd driven 3 hours. My son had been talking about the lake house for 2 weeks, ever since I'd told him we were going. We walked in through the front door. The house smelled like coffee and expensive candles. Everyone was in the living room. Jessica's kids were watching a movie on the massive TV Richard had installed over the fireplace. Richard was showing one of his business associates the new sound system. He looked up when we entered. "Sarah, you're here." He didn't get up. "The boy can play in the basement. We've set up the old toys down there." My son looked up at me. He was holding my hand. I said, "We'll get settled first. Which room should we take?" Richard frowned. "I thought you were just coming for the day. Your email said family weekend." I assumed that meant overnight. "The guest rooms are occupied." He gestured vaguely toward the stairs. "My associates are staying over. You're welcome to stay until this evening, of course." Jessica's family was staying in the master suite. My mother and Richard had one of the guest rooms. The associates had the other 2. The basement where my son could play had a pull-out couch, unfinished concrete floors, and a space heater that barely worked. I smiled. "We'll head back after lunch then." I didn't know it yet, but Richard had already decided how this would work. We weren't real family. Not in the way that counted. Not in the way that earned you a bedroom at the lake house. That March, I landed my biggest consulting client yet. A regional medical supply company looking to restructure before going into acquisition talks. They needed someone to clean up 7 years of messy bookkeeping, prepare proper financial statements, and create projections for the next 3 fiscal years. They paid me $45,000 for 4 months of work. I deposited the check on March 15, 2022. Walked out of the bank and sat in my car for 10 minutes, just looking at the receipt. My mother called that afternoon. "Richard and I are taking Jessica's family to the lake house this weekend. The kids are so excited. Richard's teaching them to fish." "That sounds nice," I said. "You could bring your son another time. Maybe in November, like Richard scheduled." 8 months away. "Maybe," I said. In April 2022, my consulting business revenue hit $83,000 for the year. I had 6 regular clients and a waiting list. I hired a part-time bookkeeper to handle my own administrative work, a community college student who charged $18 an hour and worked from her apartment. I still showed up to my day job every morning at the accounting firm. Still made my $78,000 salary. Told everyone I was tired because of single parenting. My boss pulled me aside in May. "You're doing excellent work, but you look exhausted. Are you taking care of yourself?" I assured him I was. In June, my half-sister Jessica called me. I heard you're doing some financial consulting on the side. My stomach dropped. Where did you hear that? Mom mentioned you've been working evenings. I have a friend who might need some help with her small business taxes. Can I give her your number? I'm pretty booked right now, I said. But I'll let you know if anything opens up. I didn't call Jessica's friend. I couldn't risk Richard finding out about the business. Not yet. By July 2022, I had $127,000 in my business account. I'd been paying myself a modest salary, $3,000 a month, and reinvesting everything else. Richard hosted another lake house weekend that month. He posted photos on Facebook. Jessica's kids jumping off the dock. My mother in a kayak. Richard at the grill, wearing an apron that said King of the Castle. My son asked why we weren't in the pictures. I told him we'd go another time. In September 2022, I met with a real estate attorney named Patricia Hendricks. Her office was 40 minutes from my apartment, in a town where I was certain I wouldn't run into anyone from my family. I asked her about ownership structures for vacation properties. Specifically, what would happen if someone owned a property jointly with another person but didn't know it? She raised an eyebrow. That's an unusual question. Hypothetically, I said. She explained that joint ownership could be established through a deed transfer, that both parties would need to sign, that it would be recorded with the county, and that once recorded, both owners would have equal legal rights to the property. I asked what would happen if someone had been promised joint ownership verbally but never received it in writing. She said verbal promises about real estate are generally unenforceable under the statute of frauds. I asked what would happen if there was a written agreement. She said that would depend on the specific language of the agreement. I paid her $350 for the consultation and left with a referral to a real estate litigation specialist, just in case. I didn't know that the same week I met with Patricia Hendricks, Richard was meeting with his own attorney, updating his will to explicitly state that I was to receive a token amount of $5,000 and nothing further from his estate. The lake house would go entirely to Jessica. By December 2022, my business revenue for the year was $187,000. I'd paid myself $36,000 in salary and kept the rest in the company account. I'd also maxed out my individual 401k contribution and opened a SEP IRA for the business. My mother asked me what I wanted for Christmas. I said I didn't need anything. Richard gave everyone presents on Christmas Eve. Jessica's family got a family membership to a ski resort, $3,200 value. My mother got a pair of diamond earrings. My uncle got a bottle of scotch worth $400. I got a $50 gift card to Target. My son got nothing. Richard didn't acknowledge this. Neither did anyone else. On December 27th, I drove to my son's favorite burger place, the one with the indoor playground. We sat in a booth by the window. He was eating chicken nuggets. He said, "Grandpa Richard doesn't like us very much, does he?" He'd never called Richard Grandpa before. I didn't correct him. "It's complicated," I said. "Mom, I'm 6. I'm not stupid." I didn't know what to say to that. He said, "It's okay. I don't like him either." I made a decision that night. Whatever I was building, I was going to build it faster. In January 2023, I incorporated a second LLC. This one was specifically for real estate investment. I'd been studying property acquisition strategies for 8 months. I had enough capital to make a move. In February 2023, I purchased a small commercial property in a developing area downtown. $180,000 with $54,000 down and a commercial mortgage for the rest. The building had 3 retail units on the ground floor and 2 small office spaces upstairs, all currently leased. Net operating income, $28,000 annually after expenses. I used a different registered agent, different business name, kept everything separated from my consulting LLC. My mother called in March to tell me Richard was planning a big family gathering at the lake house for his 70th birthday in June. "Everyone's coming," she said. "Even Tom is flying in from Arizona." Richard's so excited. "I'll check my calendar," I said. "Sarah, you have to come. It's his birthday." I said I'll check. In April 2023, Richard sent another email. Subject line: Lake House summer schedule and important updates. The email detailed new house rules for family weekend use. All visitors needed to contribute $150 per weekend toward maintenance and utilities. Children under 12 were restricted to certain areas of the house to preserve the condition of the furnishings. All guests needed to provide 30 days' notice before their scheduled weekend to ensure proper preparation. At the bottom of the email, a new line: Please note that the lake house is reserved for immediate family members only. This includes spouses and biological children of the primary family line. Jessica's adopted son was mentioned specifically as an exception because he's been part of the family since infancy. My son was not mentioned. I didn't need it spelled out. My son, not Richard's biological grandchild, not connected to him by marriage, not part of the primary family line, was not welcome. I called my mother. Did you read Richard's email? He's just trying to maintain the property value, honey. You know how he is about his investments. Mom, he basically said my son can't come to the lake house. A pause. He didn't say that exactly. What did he say exactly then? Sarah, don't make this difficult. Richard inherited that house from his father. It's his to do with as he pleases. I hung up. On May 3, 2023, at 2:47 p.m., I met with a private investigator named Marcus Webb. His office was above a dry cleaner in a strip mall 30 miles from where I lived. I asked him what it would cost to get detailed information about a specific property's ownership history, any outstanding liens or claims, any legal disputes, and any documentation that might exist about promises or agreements made regarding the property. He said it would depend on what I needed and how deep I needed to go. I told him I needed to go very deep. He quoted me $4,500. I paid him half up front. Marcus Webb called me back on May 18th. He'd found something interesting. Richard's father's will had included specific language about the lake house. It was left to Richard with the stipulation that it remain available for use by all descendants of the family line, in perpetuity, as a gathering place. The will had been probated in August 2021. It was public record. I asked Marcus if descendants of the family line would include me. He said that was a question for a lawyer, but generally, stepchildren who'd been legally dependent minors when the step-parent married into the family could be considered part of the family line, depending on how the will was interpreted. Richard had married my mother when I was 17. Still a minor. Still legally dependent. I asked Marcus to send me everything he'd found. Every document. Every filing. Every record. The package arrived on May 22nd. I stayed up until 3 a.m. reading through it. On May 24th, I called Patricia Hendricks, the real estate attorney. I made an appointment for the following week. Richard's 70th birthday party at the lake house was scheduled for June 17, 2023. My mother called me on June 1st to confirm I was coming. I'll be there, I said. Are you bringing your son? No, I said. I think it's better if he stays with a friend that weekend. My mother sounded relieved. That's probably for the best. Richard's really stressed about having everything perfect for his friends. His friends were going to be there. At his family birthday party. But my son wasn't welcome. I understand, I said. I met with Patricia Hendricks on June 3rd. I brought all of Marcus Webb's documentation. I showed her the will. I showed her the specific language about descendants and perpetual family access. I asked her what my legal standing was. She read through everything carefully. Took notes. Asked me questions about when Richard married my mother, about my age at the time, about whether I'd been financially dependent, about whether Richard had ever legally adopted me, he hadn't, about the specific nature of our relationship. After 90 minutes, she sat back. This is interesting, she said. The will creates what could be interpreted as a trust-like condition on the inheritance. Richard received the property, but with strings attached. Those strings include making it available to all descendants of the family line. And I'm a descendant? You're a stepchild who was a minor dependent when Richard married your mother. There's an argument that you're included in the family line, especially if Richard held himself out as your parental figure, contributed to your support, and integrated you into family activities. He paid for my last year of high school and my college. That strengthens the argument. I asked what would happen if Richard was violating the conditions of the will by excluding me and my son. Patricia said it could potentially constitute a breach of the testamentary conditions, which could give me grounds to challenge his unrestricted ownership. I asked what that would look like. She said it would likely involve litigation, which would be expensive and time-consuming, and there was no guarantee we'd win. I asked if there was another approach. She thought for a moment. If you could demonstrate that Richard acknowledged your inclusion in the family line and your right to access the property, you might have grounds for a constructive trust or equitable claim. But you'd need evidence of that acknowledgement. I told her about the family emails. The schedule he'd created that included me, even if it was the worst months. The fact that he'd initially allowed me to bring my son, even if he'd made it unwelcoming. She said that might help, but it wasn't enough for a strong case. I left her office with a strategy forming. I needed Richard to acknowledge, in front of witnesses, that I was part of the family line. That the lake house was meant for family descendants. That his father had intended it to be a family gathering place. And then I needed him to explicitly exclude me. The contradiction would be the leverage. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing. I recorded every interaction I'd had with Richard about the lake house. I compiled every email. I created a timeline of every visit, every restriction, every slight. I also made 3 phone calls to Richard's business associates, the ones who'd been staying at the lake house that first winter weekend. I told them I was putting together a photo album for Richard's birthday and asked if they had any pictures from that weekend. 2 of them sent me photos. In one of them, Richard was standing by the fireplace with his arm around Jessica. In the background, you could see me on the couch with my son. The metadata showed the date and time, January 22nd, 2022, 3:47 p.m. That was after Richard had told me there were no rooms available. After he'd suggested my son play in the basement. After he'd made it clear we weren't staying overnight. But we were in the house. At a family gathering. With Richard's business associates present. I saved the photo. On June 15th, 2 days before Richard's birthday party, I received a call from Patricia Hendricks. "I've been doing some more research," she said. "There's something else you should know about properties with testamentary conditions. If the beneficiary, in this case, Richard, violates the conditions in a way that demonstrates he's using the property contrary to the testator's intent, a court could potentially impose a constructive trust, giving other qualified beneficiaries an ownership interest. Other qualified beneficiaries like me. Potentially. But you'd need to prove violation of the conditions, and you'd need to prove you're a qualified beneficiary under the terms of the will." I told her I was working on it. She said, "Sarah, this is a long shot. You understand that, right? This kind of litigation is expensive. $50,000, maybe more. And there's no guarantee." I asked her to draw up a preliminary complaint, just in case. I'd pay her $5,000 retainer to have it ready. She hesitated. Then she said okay. On June 17th, 2023, I drove to the lake house for Richard's 70th birthday party. It was a Saturday. Clear skies, 78 degrees, perfect weather. I'd left my son with my best friend, Amy. I'd told him we were going to do something special the next weekend, just the 2 of us. He was fine with it. He'd stopped asking about the lake house months ago. I arrived at 2 p.m. Cars lined the driveway. I recognized my mother's Mercedes, Jessica's SUV, my uncle's truck. There were also 3 other vehicles I didn't recognize, more of Richard's friends. I walked in carrying a wrapped present. A book on real estate investment strategies. I'd inscribed it to Richard, who taught me everything about property. "Love, Sarah." The irony was intentional. Everyone was on the back deck. The view of the lake was spectacular. The dock had new chairs. Richard had installed a sound system that was playing jazz. My mother hugged me. "I'm so glad you came." Jessica waved from across the deck. Her kids were down at the water with their father. Richard was holding court near the grill, surrounded by 4 men in expensive casual wear. Golf shirts and loafers. The uniform of successful men at leisure. He saw me and nodded. "Sarah, good of you to make it." I walked over. "Happy birthday, Richard." I handed him the present. He opened it right there, barely looking at the inscription. "Real estate strategies." Appropriate. He set it on the side table with the other gifts. One of his friends, a man with silver hair and a Rolex, said, "This is your stepdaughter?" "This is Sarah," Richard said. "Not my stepdaughter. Just Sarah." The man extended his hand. "Tom Brennan. I've heard good things about you from Richard." I shook his hand. I doubted very much Richard had said good things about me. Richard said, "Sarah works at an accounting firm." "Decent job." "Financial analyst," I said. "Right." Tom Brennan said, "And you have a son, I understand?" "I do. He's 10. Richard interjected quickly. "Sarah's son is with a sitter today. This is more of an adult gathering." The corner of Tom Brennan's mouth twitched. He glanced at Jessica's children down by the water. They were very much present. "I see," he said. My mother appeared with a tray of appetizers. "Everyone, lunch will be ready in 20 minutes. Richard, should we gather everyone?" The party continued. I made small talk with my uncle. I helped my mother bring out side dishes. I smiled and acted like everything was perfectly normal. At 4 p.m., Richard asked everyone to gather on the deck. He had an announcement. We all assembled. 15 people total. Richard stood at the head of the deck, my mother beside him. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," he began. "This house has been in my family for over 50 years. My father bought it with his own hands and his own sweat. He built memories here with us, and now I'm building memories here with my family." He gestured to the lake, the property. "This place represents legacy. It represents what we pass down to the next generation. Family values. Hard work. Respect for what came before." He put his arm around my mother. "I'm grateful to have this family. My wife, who's been my partner for over 20 years. My stepdaughter Jessica, who's given me 2 wonderful grandchildren." He smiled at Jessica's kids. I noticed the specific phrasing. "My stepdaughter Jessica. Not my stepdaughters." Richard continued. "This house will stay in the family for generations. Jessica and her children will inherit this property when I'm gone, and they'll continue the tradition of family gatherings here. This is their legacy." Jessica's eyes welled up. She mouthed thank you to Richard. I stood there with my hands in my pockets. Tom Brennan was watching me. I could feel it. Richard raised his glass. "To family. To legacy. To the next 50 years at this lake house." Everyone raised their glasses. "To family." I raised mine too. Took a sip of wine that tasted like acid. After the toast, people dispersed. Some went down to the dock. Some stayed on the deck. Richard was immediately surrounded by well-wishers. I walked over to my mother in the kitchen. She was cutting a birthday cake. "That was a nice speech," I said. "He's so proud of this place," she said. "It means everything to him." I noticed he mentioned Jessica inheriting. My mother's hands paused on the cake knife. "Well, Jessica's his biological stepdaughter's children." "I mean," she fumbled the words. "You know what I mean." "No," I said. "I don't." "Explain it to me." "Sarah, don't start." "Mom, he literally just announced that Jessica and her kids are his family legacy. He didn't mention me once." "You know Richard. He's traditional about these things." "What things?" "Blood relations." She set down the knife. "I don't want to fight about this today." "I'm not fighting. I'm asking a question." My mother looked at me with something close to pleading. "Can we just have a nice day? Please?" I walked away. At 6 p.m., as the party was winding down, I found Richard alone on the dock. He was sitting in one of the new chairs, looking out at the water. I sat down next to him. "Beautiful evening," I said. "It is." We sat in silence for a moment. I said, "I heard what you said earlier. About the house going to Jessica. That's the plan. Your father's will said the house should be for all descendants of the family line. In perpetuity." Richard turned to look at me. His expression was careful. "My father's will left the house to me. How I choose to distribute my estate is my business. But he specified it should be for family descendants. Jessica is family. And I'm not?" Richard sighed. "Sarah, you know this isn't personal. It feels pretty personal. You're my wife's daughter. I've been good to you. Paid for your education. Helped you get started. But Jessica is different. Her children are different. There." He stopped himself. "They're what?" I said. Say it. They're really part of the family line. Biological grandchildren, through her marriage. It's just different. So my son isn't really family. Your son is your son. I don't have any obligation to him. I nodded slowly. That's clear enough. Richard stood up. Look, I didn't make the rules about how families work. But this house is mine, and I'm leaving it to the people I want to leave it to. That's the end of it. He walked back toward the house. I sat there for another 5 minutes, watching the sun start to set over the water. Then I took out my phone and texted Patricia Hendricks. He just said it. Out loud. I need that complaint ready. She responded 3 minutes later. I'll have it to you by Monday. The party ended around 8 p.m. I said my goodbyes, hugged my mother, waved to Jessica. Richard walked me to my car. Thank you for coming, he said. The social niceties intact. Happy birthday, Richard. I drove home, picked up my son from Amy's house, and put him to bed. Then I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. Patricia Hendricks' preliminary complaint arrived in my email at 9:47 p.m. on Monday, June 19th. It was 23 pages long. Legal terminology, case citations, evidentiary standards. The core argument: Richard had inherited the lake house subject to testamentary conditions requiring it to remain available for all family descendants. By explicitly excluding me and my son while allowing other step-family members and their children, Richard was violating those conditions. The complaint sought to impose a constructive trust, granting me an equitable ownership interest in the property. I read it 3 times. Then I called Patricia. How strong is this? Truthfully? Maybe 40% chance of success. But it's not about winning in court. It's about leverage. Explain. Richard won't want this to go to trial. It would be public. It would be expensive. His friends, his business associates, they'd all see that he's being challenged on a family property dispute. It looks bad. Messy. So we file and see if he wants to settle. Exactly. You might not get full ownership, but you could negotiate for access rights, or a buyout, or joint ownership with Jessica. Something. I asked her what it would cost to file. She said the initial filing fee plus her work to date would be around $7,500. If it went to litigation, we'd be looking at $40,000 to $75,000 total. I had $240,000 in my business accounts. My commercial property was generating $28,000 annually. My consulting business was on track for $195,000 in revenue this year. I could afford it. I told Patricia to hold off on filing. I wanted to try one more thing first. On June 25th, 1 week after Richard's birthday party, I sent him an email. Subject line: Lake House access for family descendants. Body: Richard, I've been thinking about our conversation at your birthday party. I'd like to discuss your father's intentions for the lake house and how we can honor his wishes while respecting your ownership. I believe there's a solution that works for everyone. Would you be available to meet this week? He responded 4 hours later. I don't see what there is to discuss. My decisions regarding the property are final. I replied, I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. This concerns your father's will and the legal conditions attached to your inheritance. I have documentation I'd like to show you. Thursday at 2 p.m.? I can come to your office. He didn't respond for 2 days. Then, on Wednesday, fine. Thursday at 2. My office downtown. Don't waste my time. On Thursday, July 29th, at 1:47 p.m., I walked into Richard's office building. It was a glass tower in the financial district. His company occupied the 14th floor. I was wearing a navy suit I'd bought specifically for this meeting. I carried a leather portfolio that contained copies of his father's will, the case law Patricia Hendricks had compiled, and a settlement proposal we'd drafted. Richard's assistant showed me into his office at 2:03 p.m. His office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A massive desk made of dark wood. Photos on the credenza: my mother, Jessica's family, Richard shaking hands with various important-looking people. No photos of me. Richard was sitting behind his desk, looking at his computer. He didn't stand up when I entered. Sit, he said. I sat in the chair across from his desk. He closed his laptop and looked at me. What's this about? I opened my portfolio and slid a copy of his father's will across the desk. Your father's will includes specific language about the lake house. Have you read it recently? He glanced at it. I know what's in my father's will. Then you know it says the property should remain available for use by all descendants of the family line, in perpetuity, as a gathering place. So I'm a descendant of the family line. I was your legal dependent when you married my mother. You paid for my education. You integrated me into family activities. You held yourself out as my parental figure. Richard leaned back in his chair. You're reaching. Am I? I slid another document across the desk. This is an email you sent in January 2022 outlining the family weekend schedule. I'm included in that schedule. You allocated specific weekends for me to use the property. I was being generous. Or you were acknowledging that I'm part of the family line with rights to access the property under your father's will. His jaw tightened. What do you want, Sarah? I slid the settlement proposal across the desk. Joint ownership. You and me. We share maintenance costs. We share decision-making. We both have equal rights to use the property and to pass those rights to our children. Richard picked up the proposal. Read it. Then he laughed. You think I'm going to give you half my inheritance because of some vague language in a will? I think the language isn't vague at all. And I think if we end up in court, you're going to spend a lot of money and time defending your interpretation. You don't have the money to take me to court. I met his eyes. Are you sure about that? Something shifted in his expression. A flicker of uncertainty. I said, I've consulted with Patricia Hendricks at Hendricks & Associates. She specializes in trust and estate litigation. She thinks I have a viable case. We're prepared to file a complaint seeking to impose a constructive trust on the property. Richard set down the proposal. You're bluffing. Try me. We stared at each other for a long moment. Then Richard said, even if you somehow convinced a judge to hear this ridiculous claim, you'd never win. The will left the property to me. My father wanted me to have it. End of story. Your father wanted you to have it for the family. All of the family. And you've explicitly excluded me and my son while allowing other step-family members. That's a violation of the testamentary conditions. I don't have to justify my family decisions to you or anyone else. I stood up. Then I'll see you in court. I walked toward the door. Richard's voice stopped me. Wait. I turned. He was standing now. His face was red. You ungrateful. I paid for your college. I helped your mother when she had nothing. And this is how you repay me. You helped my mother because you love her. You paid for my college because I was your dependent child. That doesn't give you the right to treat my son like he doesn't exist. Your son is not my responsibility. No one said he was. But when you inherited a property with conditions attached, you accepted those conditions. One of those conditions was keeping it available for family descendants. I'm a descendant. My son is a descendant. You can't pick and choose which family members count. Richard walked around his desk. You have no idea what you're starting. I know exactly what I'm starting. This will destroy your relationship with your mother. With Jessica. With everyone. That's not my choice. It's yours. You can sign the settlement agreement and we can move forward as co-owners, or we can let a judge decide. Either way, I'm not backing down. I left his office at 2:34 p.m. He didn't call me that night. Or the next day. On Saturday, July 1st, my mother called. What did you do? I had a meeting with Richard. He's furious. He says you're threatening to sue him over the lake house. I'm not threatening. I'm explaining his legal obligations under his father's will. Sarah, this is ridiculous. That house is Richard's. His father left it to him. With conditions, Mom. Conditions he's violating. You're being selfish. I almost laughed. I'm being selfish? Richard literally announced at his birthday party that I'm not part of the family legacy. He told me my son doesn't belong at family gatherings. But I'm selfish for asking him to honor his father's wishes. He didn't mean it like that. How did he mean it then? She was quiet. I said, Mom, I gave him a chance to settle this reasonably. Joint ownership. We share the property. Everyone wins. He refused. Because it's his property. Then we'll let a court decide that. I hung up. Jessica called 30 minutes later. I can't believe you're doing this to Dad. I noticed she called him Dad. she never had before. I'm not doing anything to Richard. I'm protecting my rights and my son's rights. Your son doesn't have any rights to that property. Actually, he might. And that's exactly what the lawsuit will determine. This is going to tear the family apart. The family's already torn apart, Jess. Richard made sure of that when he decided my son wasn't real family. She hung up. On July 5th, Richard sent me an email through his lawyer. Subject line, Lake House dispute. The email was formal. Cold. It stated that Richard rejected any claim I had to the lake property, that he considered my threats of litigation to be baseless and harassing, and that if I proceeded with filing a complaint, he would vigorously defend his rightful ownership and seek sanctions against me for filing a frivolous lawsuit. I forwarded it to Patricia Hendricks. She called me. He's posturing. This is actually good. It means he's scared. Doesn't sound scared. Trust me. If he wasn't worried, he wouldn't have responded at all. The fact that he's threatening sanctions is a classic intimidation tactic. It means he's hoping you'll back down. I'm not backing down. I know. So here's what we do. We file the complaint. We serve him. And then we wait to see if he's willing to negotiate once he realizes we're serious. On July 12, 2023, Patricia Hendricks filed a complaint in county court. Mitchell v. Thornton. Case number CV 2023-4782. The complaint outlined the testamentary conditions in Richard's father's will, my status as a family descendant, Richard's acknowledgement of my family status through his actions and communications, and his subsequent violation of those conditions by excluding me and my son from family access to the property. We requested that the court impose a constructive trust, granting me an equitable ownership interest in the lake house. Richard was served with the complaint on July 18th. He didn't call me, didn't email, didn't respond directly. His lawyer filed an answer on August 2nd, denying all material allegations and asserting multiple affirmative defenses: statute of frauds, statute of limitations, failure to state a claim, lack of standing. Patricia reviewed the answer. Standard defensive playbook. Nothing surprising here. We began discovery. Interrogatories. Requests for production of documents. Depositions scheduled. This was going to be a long fight. In September 2023, my commercial property's lease came up for renewal with one of the tenants. The retail space on the corner. I renegotiated the lease for a 12% increase. New annual revenue from that property, $31,360. My consulting business hit $210,000 in revenue for the year. I hired Patricia Hendricks as my full-time litigation counsel. Retainer, $25,000. My mother stopped calling. Jessica blocked me on social media. My son asked why we didn't see grandma anymore. I told him sometimes families have disagreements, but it would be okay. He said, "Is this about the lake house?" I was surprised he remembered. Partly. The one where they said I couldn't go? Yeah. He shrugged. I didn't really like it there anyway. The basement was cold. I hugged him. In October 2023, we deposed Richard. 3 hours in a conference room, Richard across the table with his lawyer, a court reporter typing every word. Patricia asked him about his father's will, about the specific language regarding family descendants, about whether he understood that language created conditions on his inheritance. Richard's lawyer objected to half the questions. Objection, calls for a legal conclusion. Objection, outside the scope. Objection, vague. But Richard answered. He said his father's will left him the property. Full stop. Any conditions were suggestions, not legal requirements. Patricia showed him the family weekend schedule he'd created. Asked him why he'd included me if I wasn't part of the family. He said he was trying to be kind. She asked him about the birthday party speech where he'd said Jessica and her children would inherit the property. He said that was his decision to make. She asked him about telling me my son wasn't real family. His lawyer objected. Richard refused to answer. Patricia marked it as evasive. The deposition ended at 5:47 p.m. I'd sat there the entire time, saying nothing, watching Richard squirm under questioning. In November 2023, Richard's lawyer made a settlement offer. They would give me $15,000 and full release from any future claims to the property. Patricia called me. What do you think? That's insulting. Agreed. I'll counter. We countered with our original proposal: joint ownership, shared costs, equal access rights. They rejected it. We went back to litigation. In December 2023, Richard filed a motion for summary judgment, arguing that I had no legal standing to challenge his ownership and that the will's language about family descendants was precatory, not mandatory. We opposed the motion. Briefing went on for weeks. In January 2024, the judge denied Richard's motion for summary judgment, ruled that there were genuine issues of material fact regarding the testamentary conditions and whether I qualified as a family descendant entitled to enforce those conditions. Trial was set for June 2024. Richard's lawyer called Patricia the next day. They wanted to talk settlement. In February 2024, we met in a mediator's office. Neutral ground. A retired judge serving as mediator. Richard and his lawyer on one side. Me and Patricia on the other. The mediator explained the process. Each side would present their position. He'd facilitate negotiation. Richard's lawyer started. Our client inherited this property outright. The will's language about family descendants is aspirational, not legally binding. Ms. Mitchell has no valid claim. Patricia responded. The will creates clear testamentary conditions. Our client is a family descendant who was a legal dependent of Mr. Thornton when he married her mother. He acknowledged her family status repeatedly. He's now violating those conditions by excluding her. We're entitled to equitable relief. The mediator asked what we were seeking. Patricia said, joint ownership, equal rights, shared responsibilities. Richard's lawyer said that was unacceptable. We negotiated for 4 hours. By the end, we had an offer. I would receive a 25% ownership interest in the lake house. Richard would retain 75%. We would share maintenance costs proportionally. I would have guaranteed access to the property 4 weekends per year of my choosing, with 30 days advance notice. Upon Richard's death, my ownership interest would increase to 40%, with Jessica receiving 60%. My son would have full access rights as a descendant. The mediator asked if I'd accept. I looked at Patricia. She nodded slightly. I said, I want 6 weekends per year, including at least 2 summer weekends. And I want my ownership interest to increase to 50% upon Richard's death, not 40%. Richard's lawyer conferred with Richard. They stepped out of the room. 20 minutes later, they came back. 5 weekends. 1 guaranteed summer weekend. 45% ownership upon death. I took it. We signed the settlement agreement on February 28, 2024. I became a 25% owner of a $450,000 lake house. Richard didn't speak to me at the signing. Didn't make eye contact. Signed the papers and left. My mother called me that night. I hope you're happy. I am. You've destroyed this family. No, Mom. Richard destroyed it when he decided my son didn't belong. I just made sure he couldn't get away with it. She hung up. In March 2024, I took my son to the lake house for our first weekend as co-owners. We had the place to ourselves. Richard had made sure we weren't scheduled at the same time. My son ran down to the dock, jumped in the water, swam until his lips turned blue. We stayed in the master bedroom, the one I'd never been allowed to use before. That night, we made s'mores on the fire pit. My son asked if we could come back next month. I said yes. In April 2024, my consulting business revenue hit $235,000 for the year. My commercial property was fully leased with a waiting list for the next available space. I purchased a second commercial property in May. $310,000. 3 retail units, 1 office space. Net operating income, $38,000 annually. My total net worth reached $670,000. I was 34 years old. In August 2024, Richard sent a formal notice that he wanted to use the lake house the same weekend I'd reserved for September. I declined to move my reservation. It was my contractual right. He showed up anyway. We were both there for 2 extremely awkward days. My son and I stayed in the master bedroom. Richard stayed in one of the guest rooms. We didn't speak beyond basic civilities. On the second day, Richard's lawyer called Patricia. They wanted to buy out my ownership interest. Patricia asked what they were offering. $75,000. My 25% stake in a $450,000 property was worth $112,500. They were offering $37,500 under value. I rejected it. In October 2024, Richard filed a petition to partition the property. He wanted the court to order the house sold so we could divide the proceeds. Patricia told me this was a worst-case scenario. If the court ordered partition by sale, we'd both lose the property. But it was also a sign of desperation. Richard would rather lose the lake house entirely than share it with me. We fought the partition petition. Argued that partition by sale would violate the testamentary intent to keep the property in the family. Argued that partition in kind was impossible with a single-family dwelling. The court scheduled a hearing for January 2025. In November 2024, my mother called. First time in months. Richard is not doing well, she said. I'm sorry to hear that. This lawsuit, this fight over the house, it's destroying him. He's stressed constantly. His blood pressure is through the roof. Mom, he could have avoided all of this by just honoring his father's wishes. His father didn't want the house torn apart by legal battles. His father wanted the house available for all family descendants. Richard's the one who violated that. Please, Sarah, drop the partition fight. Let him have the house. I'll pay you the $112,500 myself. Just let this end. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. No. Why not? Because it's not about the money, Mom. It's about my son knowing that he belongs. That he has a place in this family. That he can't be erased because Richard decided he doesn't count. My mother was crying. You've become so hard. No, Mom. I've become so clear. In December 2024, 2 weeks before the partition hearing, Richard's lawyer called with a new offer. They would withdraw the partition petition. I could keep my 25% ownership. Richard would guarantee me 6 weekends per year, including 2 summer weekends. And upon his death, my ownership interest would increase to 50%, equal with Jessica. In exchange, I had to agree never to bring another legal claim related to the property. Patricia said it was better than our settlement agreement. Better than what we'd gotten in mediation. I accepted. We signed the amended settlement on December 18, 2024. The partition petition was withdrawn. I now owned 25% of the lake house with guaranteed rights and a path to 50% ownership. For 3 months, everything was stable. I used my weekends. Richard used his. We maintained careful distance. My son turned 11 in March 2025. We celebrated his birthday at the lake house, just the 2 of us. He invited 2 friends. They spent the weekend swimming and fishing and staying up too late. He told me it was the best birthday he'd ever had. My consulting business was on track for $275,000 in revenue for 2025. I'd hired 2 part-time associates to handle the overflow of clients. My commercial properties were generating $69,360 in combined annual income. I'd paid off my commercial mortgages ahead of schedule. My net worth reached $890,000. Jessica got divorced in April 2025. Her husband moved to another state. The kids stayed with her. She called me in May. First time since the lawsuit started. I need to talk to you about something, she said. We met at a coffee shop. Neutral territory. She looked tired. Older than her 38 years. I was wrong, she said. About the lake house. About how Dad treated you and your son. I was so focused on protecting what I thought was mine that I didn't see how unfair it all was. I didn't say anything. She continued. My divorce lawyer asked about the lake house. About my inheritance. When I explained the whole situation, she said I was lucky you'd fought for your share, because if you hadn't, the property could have been considered marital property in my divorce. Your lawsuit actually protected my interest. I almost laughed. The irony. Jessica said, I want to apologize. For taking Dad's side. For not standing up for you. Okay, that's it? Okay. What do you want me to say, Jess? That it's fine? It's not fine. But it's over. We finished our coffee in silence. She texted me 2 weeks later. Asked if our kids could have a weekend together at the lake house sometime. I said maybe. For 4 months after that, everything was quiet. I used my weekends. Richard used his. The arrangement worked. My son started 6th grade. He joined the swim team. He was happy. I thought maybe this was the new normal. Distant but functional. Resolved. Then yesterday, February 15th, 2026, my lawyer called. Richard's lawyer just contacted me. They're claiming you violated the settlement agreement. My stomach dropped. How? They're saying you used the property for commercial purposes by hosting a business retreat there last month. The settlement agreement specifically prohibits commercial use. I had hosted a small team retreat at the lake house in January. My 2 consulting associates and 3 clients. We'd worked on strategic planning for 2 days. That wasn't commercial use, I said. That was personal use. I'm allowed to have guests. They're arguing that because you charged your clients for the retreat as part of your consulting fees, it constitutes commercial use of the property. That's ridiculous. Maybe. But they're threatening to file a breach of contract claim. They want to void the settlement agreement and revoke your ownership interest. Can they do that? Patricia was quiet for a moment. It depends on how the court interprets the commercial use clause. It's ambiguous. We'd have to litigate it. We just settled this. I know. He's never going to stop, is he? He's going to keep finding ways to try to force me out. It's possible. I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table, looking at the settlement agreement. The one I'd fought 2 years to get. The one that was supposed to end all of this. There was a clause on page 7. Section 4B, property shall not be used for commercial purposes, including but not limited to business meetings, corporate retreats, or rental to third parties. I'd hosted a business retreat. Richard had a case. I opened my safe. Pulled out a folder I'd been keeping since 2023. Inside was a USB drive. On that drive was a recording from Richard's 70th birthday party in June 2023. Specifically, a recording of the conversation I'd had with Richard on the dock. The conversation where he'd said, explicitly, that my son wasn't real family. That he had no obligation to him. That the lake house was for biological grandchildren through marriage and not for my son. I'd recorded it on my phone. Transcript prepared by a professional service. Timestamped. Authenticated. I'd never used it in the litigation. Never needed to. The settlement had come through without it. But I'd kept it. Because I knew Richard. I knew he wouldn't stop. I called Patricia Hendricks. I have something I didn't show you before, I said. A recording from 2023. Richard explicitly stating that my son doesn't belong at the lake house because he's not real family. Patricia was quiet. Why didn't you produce this during discovery? Because I didn't need to. But if he's going to claim I breached the settlement agreement by using the house for business purposes, I'm going to show the court exactly why this settlement exists in the first place. I'm going to show them what kind of person Richard really is. Sarah, that recording might not be admissible. Depending on the state recording laws. It was recorded in a public outdoor space during a family gathering. He had no expectation of privacy. I checked. She exhaled. Okay, let me review it. Send it to me. I sent the file. This morning, Richard's lawyer filed the breach of contract claim. Case number CV 2026-1893. My son asked me at breakfast if we were still going to the lake house next weekend. I looked at him. 11 years old. Still asking if he was allowed to go to the place his step-grandfather tried to keep him away from. Yes, I said. We're still going. Even though Grandpa Richard is mad again? Especially because Grandpa Richard is mad. So, what do you think? Did Richard go too far, or was I justified in fighting for my son's rights? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more family drama updates.